So, you guys see the topic of the stream today. Our goal is simple. I want to create a list of the top 10 Mythic Plus dungeons of all time. And then to make it a little bit more interesting, Dratnos and Dorki, the pod crew, they are going to make their own top 10 list, independent of me. We are then going to get together as a group of 3 people, go through our lists and discuss the dungeons and discuss what makes them good. And then we're going to, as a group, watch Hirumared's new video. We are going to see which one of us gets the most right that Hirumared voted for. And then we will also have chat vote on whose top 10 they agree with the most. That's what's happening today. All right, let's do it. I'm making the call. Hello?
Where hell's everyone else?
They're here. You answered the call instantly, and the first thing you said was, "Where is everyone else?" But like,
bro, these guys take 10 seconds to react.
Bro, you gotta show up to a party late, man. Gotta be fashionably late,
just pick up
That's
the phone
true.
right
Yeah,
away
that's
when she
true.
calls.
Yeah.
all right.
Yeah,
So all of you guys have
Cool
your,
kids.
you guys all have your list, right? Your top 10 Mythic Plus dungeons ever.
Yeah, I made
Yes.
a top 10 list for my own, and then one for what I think they would put.
Yeah, I didn't do that because I think that's just going to add a ton of time to this. I think it's more like it's going to be interested to see, in a way, the goal is not to
Wait, did you order it too?
Yeah, I ordered it out of 10. Like the goal is not to. You should order it real quick. All of you, actually. There's a reason why. So it's getting your true list as close to Hirumared as possible is not, I mean, that may be who wins, I guess, but that's not ideal. I don't know if you guys have watched some Hirumared lists, but sometimes, just an example, his worst raid bosses of all time, the number 1 is Siegecrafter Blackfuse from Siege of Orgrimmar, which is one of the best raid bosses of all time, and it's not close. It's insane.
Holy.
So maybe the literal best non-end boss, or top 3. So he has some cooked opinions. So we're gonna kind of watch it on Watch together afterwards. But here's how this is gonna go. It's basically just a good time to talk about fun dungeons and your ability to defend your picks. So how it's gonna go is we're gonna all go through our top 10 in order. But I'll read my 10, and then to determine whether we're talking about it or not, it'll only be if it's the highest on the list, so we don't talk about things multiple times. So if I give you my number 10 and it's Mist of Tyrannosaith or something like that, you guys will be oh, I had that higher. And if you do, we're just going to move on to Growl's 10. And then the only time we actually sit and discuss the dungeons and debate or deliberate about it is when it is the highest on anyone's particular list, if that makes sense. It makes this easier to do, and it also it makes it more interesting when we're talking about, let's just say someone has like Halls of Valor at 2, then you would be able to talk about Halls of Valor being good, but it would also be you'd have to debate that because a lot of people would probably have it lower or something like that. You know what I'm saying? So that's just does everyone understand that? How the general thing will work?
Yeah, I guess I have a clarifying question here. Are we trying to match Hirumared's list, or is this our own?
This is your own list. This is what if you had to sit in front of a court of people and debate that you are right on your dungeon list, even though it's obviously subjective, but for fun, you would be defending your own list. This is what you believe. All right, cool. So the order will be me, Growl, Dorki, then Dratnos, and we'll go left to right. So starting off with my one, and I think this might be, I'm interested to see if you guys have this on your list, but all I can say about it is that when I did it this season, I found it super, super fun. So my number 10 is actually Galakrond's Fall. Does anyone else have that on their list?
I do not, but I almost did. I think the boss fights in there are cool. I think the layout's cool. There's a little bit too much RP for me, and it's a little bit too linear, but it's close. It's up there. I think it's a nice dungeon, I think.
Yeah, Dratnos, do you have this, first of all?
I do not know. I would have interjected and said we'll talk about this later, following the rules that you set forth.
Yeah, correct.
Earlier.
Okay, good. I'm glad.
Yeah.
That's why I wanted to make sure, because I wanted to talk about
I missed the rules completely. What were the rules?
Oh, okay.
Well, it's just the rules.
You.
It's not really rules. It's rules to make this not a giant mess and hard to follow and easier to YouTube timestamp, I suppose. But we only want to talk about each of the dungeons one time, not every time they come up on someone's list if it's in a different order. So if I were to say I have Galakrond's Fall, then someone's like, oh, I have that higher in my list. You wouldn't have to say what number. You just say I have that higher, and then we would just move on to Growl's number 10. And that way we only talk about each dungeon once, and you only talk about them when they're at their highest point. So we will say Fall. So I'm assuming... So he said it was close. Was Galakrond's Fall close for any of you guys? I thought I was kind of crazy for putting this. I I think there are parts of this dungeon that just snuck on my list, but like there are parts of this dungeon that don't make sense to be good. Like the trash was really overtuned before the second boss. The second boss had that like jumping and moving thing and the stacking thing that was like bugged for a while. And I don't even think the last boss is particularly good, but this was just the dungeon in this season, and there are a couple of other dungeons on my list that are like this, that I just, every single time I was doing dungeons this season, I just wanted to be in Galakrond's Fall 100% of the time. Like, it is just the dungeon that I sought out. Maybe if I was putting this up against some other dungeon seasons, maybe it doesn't end up as high, but when I was trying to deliberate between that last spot, and there were some honorable mentions that I'm sure will be on a few of your lists, so I won't mention them, but I just found myself wanting to be in this key. I mean, do any of you guys feel strongly about it either way?
I feel pretty strongly about it. I feel like second boss trash room was pretty oppressive, especially on fortified weeks. Especially as a DPS, it was so annoying dying constantly. So I guess for your PvP, it was a little bit different since you were playing Demon Hunter. But if I ever played Boomkin, it was like, oh, goddamn, I'm just perma-dead here. And then on the boss, I was also perma-dead. It was also really annoying. It was also like way too coordination heavy with the whole dispel mechanic. And last boss I also thought was like extremely mediocre / bad, and the dungeon was just like you kind of just did the same thing every single time. I mean, it was kind of like alright for like the first 10-20 times. Like if you're just like farming your double time or trinkets or whatever, it was like, you know, it was pretty alright, but I didn't really like that dungeon too much.
Yeah, here's the weird thing. I agree with literally everything you just said, and I just love this dungeon. Like I just still wanted to do it all the time.
Yeah.
And I felt like it had to be on my list. What is there anything Dratnos or Growl you guys found? I mean, the one thing for me is for sure is I think it's kind of embarrassing that the second boss ended up working the way it did for all of the season, right? It was like it didn't tell you exactly how it worked. The whole like moving and taking damage thing seemed really unintuitive. Like it should have been in the dungeon journal or something, and there was a massive amount of like pug wipes to this boss specifically. Also, like the dispel mechanic without some kind of aura is like definitely questionable, you know? Like
the liquid aura.
What liquid aura? Is there an aura people use on this boss from us?
Yeah, you told Bart to make it. You don't remember? And a lot of people are using it.
Oh, I mean, I know that I had Bart make it for the idea of doing that. I just had no idea that people actually used it.
Yeah, people use it.
Oh, that's hype. Let's go. Out here for the Mythic Plus community. All right. So Galakrond's Falls in my 10. Growl, what's your 10?
I have Eye of Azshara as my number 10.
Oh, wow.
I have it higher.
Okay.
Oh,
Okay.
okay.
Objection.
Okay, so we'll talk about Eye later, but in Growls, we have Eye of Azshara. I can't wait to talk about this dungeon.
So
totally
if I
disagree.
run it through and all 10 of mine are picked, then I win, right? All right. So my number 9 is Halls.
No, you do not. You do not give your 9 yet. We go to.
I have it higher.
We go.
Wait, which Halls?
We go to.
Oh, good point.
I'm muted.
The
Fuck.
one that
Stop.
the
Stop.
One...
You do not go to your 9 if someone has your 10. We move on to Dorky's 10.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Idiots.
Yep. You absolute.
Trying to win.
You absolute buffoon. No, I muted my dungeon. There. Yeah. Well, the winning happens later. Okay. So you have Eye of Azshara. We'll come back to your halls then again later. Dorky, what's your 10?
Halls of Atonement.
I'm assuming someone else has that higher.
Not me, man. That was the Siggy Halls.
Oh,
Boys, I
have
have
it
messed
higher.
up. You have Halls of Atonement higher than 10?
Yep.
Okay. Dratnos, what is your 10?
Waycrest Manor.
I have Waycrest higher. All right. Looks like we're gonna have a lot of repeats. Okay. My number 9 is Atal'Dazar.
I have it higher.
Is that higher?
I have a higher.
Okay. Growl, what's your 9?
My 9 is Halls of Atonement.
Does anyone have it higher than 9 Halls of Atonement?
Doesn't seem like it.
Doesn't seem like it. Okay. Make your case.
Bang. I think the opening area was really cool. I like that although you had to kill the 3 shards, you could pull it in a lot of different ways. There was a lot of different profiles of like pulls and damage and stuff that you had to do in that dungeon. I would say it's not great. I think some of the boss fights were probably the weaker parts, but at the same time, none of the boss fights were super problematic, and honestly that makes it like a good dungeon in M+, honestly. I think in general, I think Halls is just like a pretty good, like, pull lots of trash, you have some different routing, like, there's nothing really in the dungeon that I like really dislike, and we pulled all 3 shards with a Bear Druid and MDI, and it was sick.
It was low cognitive overload too. Like every mob just like did one thing at most.
Oh, that's a good point. So like when you pulled all of it, it like felt like it was doing the same amount of things that like a current 8-pack would do, right? Yeah.
And a lot of people, like, I think every role sort of had something different, right? Like, you do a giant pull, but it's really like, if you're a melee, you watch out for the frontals. Like, if you're a caster, you get the kicks on the guys. Then there's the shard, and that does the AoE damage that the healer heals, and, like, the tanks gotta, you know, live. I think it's just, like, a nice, straightforward, like, chill dungeon.
Nice chill halls.
Yeah, I wonder too, because like obviously everyone's going to relate to this in different ways, and there is definitely a dungeon on my list that I don't think is going to be in any of yours, and I know a lot of my chat was like really upset about it, but it's because my only experience was doing it in the MDI. I wonder how much MDI Halls of Atonement changed a few of your all's perspectives over like the average, or if like you mentioned that, because that's real, right? You're making your own list. If you're talking about how much fun you had in a dungeon, it's possible you did 1 million MDI pulls of halls and you're like became your favorite dungeon because that was so awesome, right?
Yeah, I tried to think of it more. Yeah, like I tried to think of it more in the general perspective, but I mean, I am coming from the bias of like someone who healed in, you know, in Shadowlands.
Bias,
so
that there's a reason there's 4 of us. I think our own individual biases actually makes this conversation a lot more important or interesting, right?
Oh yeah, my list will get a lot worse. Don't worry.
Oh, do you have some? Wait, do any of you guys have some spicy ones or what? I don't. I feel like the rest of mine, outside of my next one, are not spicy at all. They're like universally approved dungeons.
Yeah, I think I have like a medium spicer, but nothing.
Some spice,
nothing crazy.
Okay.
I want to say Halls and Galakrond's Fall were both in my like top 15, but the thing about Halls I didn't like was the between the first and second boss trash that was always like skipped. I just always think whenever there's stuff like that in a dungeon, that takes points off for me.
Halls didn't actually. Before we move on to the next one, Halls didn't even make my top 15, and it wasn't even my number 1 Shadowlands dungeon. Did anyone else? First of all, does anyone have Mist on their list? I'd assume not.
Nope.
I think Hyrule might.
Hirumared, yeah, maybe. I love Mist for some reason, and that was actually ahead of Halls for me, but that's with a very, very limited experience of doing Shadowlands dungeons at all. And do you remember the seed thing, Growl?
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
Dude, dude, I had no idea what they were talking about too. They kept on saying DK seed, and I was like, dude, I don't know what that means.
The seed that I told you to click that you're just
no,
like,
I know, but yeah, I know that. I'm just saying, like, I thought they were like complimenting me, like I was owning them up.
What?
Like, no, I thought
you thought they were complimenting you.
Yeah, I thought like they were like saying, "Yo, give him your seed." DK, keep giving him your seed. Like
what?
Like I'm nutting on him or something. Like with all my cooldowns. Yeah, I guess that didn't really make it.
I don't know, Dan. I fucking love that dungeon. All right. Okay. Dorky, what is your?
You change the marker.
Yeah, Dorky, what is your 9?
Maw of Souls.
Ooh. Does anyone have Maw higher?
No, man, that place was awful.
Yeah, I left this off my list for a reason. Make your case.
Well, I mean, it was the only dungeon to exist that's below 30 minutes. It's a 24-minute dungeon timer, which is like amazing.
Okay.
I will say like the dungeon had like a lot of flaws, which is like why I put it a little bit lower. Like the bosses were not particularly amazing, had a lot of bad camera angles, but it was just like a nice short dungeon that you just went in and out super quick. It was super memorable back when I was farming legendaries in Legion, where you would just like spam +2 Maw of Souls and just fucking run it down, pull everything. But yeah, like not a whole lot of like super strong cases for Maw. It's really just it's a short dungeon, and it was nice to spam.
Yeah. Okay. It's like if Dragonflight Season 1, do you remember Shadow and Burial Grounds and Court of Stars in that season?
Yeah.
Where they were like faster and easier than all the other ones? It's like if that happened in a season where you had to farm 1,000 M+ dungeons to get your Legos and artifact power, right? And like, so you just play those dungeons because they're easier and faster. And being easier and faster is like good, but if there's only one easy and fast dungeon in the season, then it's not good anymore because now it is the dungeon that you run. It's the place that you are imprisoned within for months, making your artifact weapon good. So I think that's one of those cases of like, if the whole season had been dungeons of that length, it would have been a banger. That would have been so good. But just one being like that, it kind of poisons the well.
Now we're cooking Dratnos. Yep, like I think more dungeons need to be shorter timers.
Well, isn't that the thing?
Excitingly, War Within is looking like that.
Yeah, we don't know Mythic Plus timers yet, but the War Within, they're like, I think there's 5 3-boss dungeons and 3 4-boss dungeons, and
yeah, but they're kind of long. I'd be doubtful if they were like.
Yeah, but even the 4-boss dungeons, like usually it's boss at the end. And
yeah, I was about to say
they're probably like 30 minutes. I'm gonna say that.
Yeah, but like if whatever the average, I bet whatever the average Mythic Plus dungeon time is in Dragonflight's dungeons, I bet it is -5 minutes from that. The average.
-5? You're
I think so. I think so. What do you mean? There's one.
The 3-boss dungeons, man. How do you make a 3-boss dungeon have a 40-minute timer?
Yeah,
that's a big number.
Okay, well, I mean, we'll wait and see. I think Maw. I'll give up a good and bad case for Maw. So the good for Maw is that, or no, start with the bad. So people did this place 1 million times, and their only experience with it was on a low key. In a high key, it had like a lot of really problematic, overtuned things that were happening just across the whole dungeon. From the little that I experienced, that's the bad, which is not a lot of bad. But I want to mention the goods. it is thematically fucking amazing. Like the idea of like being on a ghost ship and like just like seriously top 8 out of 9, like 8 or 9 out of 10 executed theme across like all dungeons. And if you guys remember what people said about BFA, like, oh, island expeditions were on the slide for BFA, and no one ended up liking island expeditions, or maybe people did, and they when they realized they were a little underrated because like, oh, well, you only really hate them because you had to do it. But if you didn't have to do it, they were kind of enjoyable. Maw of Souls was island expeditions before island expeditions were. It was the thing.
But it banged.
It was exactly. It was the thing you had to do to progress through the game, and it was the most efficient way to do that. But people never hated that version of Maw of Souls. They enjoyed it, where the island version of that, people ended up despising them because they had to do it. So I think that alone is a huge positive for Maw, because it could have very easily been really annoying to do, and it ended up being pretty enjoyable.
Oh, all hands on deck. Remember that.
Growl, do you feel any way about that? Did you play in Legion, right?
I didn't play in Legion. I think Dorky's just trying to appeal to the people by saying the dungeon that people remember fondly because they don't have to spam it anymore, and it probably sucked. But Dorky's gonna appeal to the people. That's my thought.
For Maw, I mean, you gotta try Maw yourself. That shit's a banger.
Let's go, dude. I love dude, it's like a cat fight. Let's fucking get it. All right, let's
This guy's an idiot.
All right, Dratnos, what's your 9?
I have Azshara.
Is this the highest Eye of Azshara is? I really hope it is. Is this the?
So, yeah.
Is this the highest? Okay, I am an Eye of Azshara hater, I think, but go ahead and make your case.
Dungeon was sweet. It was wide open. You walk in. Now, of course, this did have sort of the Brackenhide problem of there was one path that you took and one path that you don't take. But it was cool. There was a lot of different places you could get your count. There were a couple different strategies. There was like a skip that lasted that whole season that you could do to get between the bosses. The last boss was like very difficult, but also I think of the Legion bosses that were difficult, it was one of the ones that was actually like fairest and, you know, throughputiest rather than just I'm hard because I one-shot you every, 25 seconds or whatever.
Yeah.
It did have a little bit of that, but not as much as the rest of that expansion. And yeah, I mean, there was creativity, there were fun boss fights, good healer moments. It was great if you had to execute class on the last boss. It was fun.
Any other takes before I go?
Yeah, I mean, it was cool, but I don't know.
You could bolster up an animal to the size of a skyscraper and have it just walk up and one-shot you. It was fun. You could play with a marksmanship hunter that had the Sidewinder's ability, and they could summon seagulls from literal Narnia to every pull with you. It was great.
I mean, I don't know if that makes it great.
It's fun.
This wasn't like
a lot of opinions
super.
on Azshara.
This wasn't super far off my list. I just feel like some Legion dungeons have the nostalgia factor of being in Legion. Mythic Plus is new and everything is cool. Like, I specifically, Court of Stars is not on my list. But if you were to have me make this list 2 years ago, Court of Stars would have been on my list, and it would have been near the top. And then they brought it back, and I realized that maybe it's really not that good. And that, I feel like Eye of Azshara would go through that. I think Eye of Azshara, if they brought it back, would be a stinker, in my opinion. You mentioned the thing right off the bat that I think is super important. I think non-linear stuff, I personally have like a bias towards those being really cool. And Brackenhide loses points for this for me. And also this loses points because you can go do the ogres to the right away. There's like an entire cave of ogres, which Frank, by the way, Frank loves doing stuff like this. What he'll do if this is a YouTube video is he'll have like a video of all of this stuff we're talking about while we're talking about it. Yeah. And there's just the fact that you could never really actually go that way, I think really matters. And basically, I just think if they were to bring this dungeon back, it would just be one where I had the Court of Stars thing. Could be wrong, but it didn't make my top 10 because of that reason alone. But I don't hate the pick.
It was all right.
And then Growl, you didn't play then, correct? So you have zero opinion.
Well,
I
actually did have it on my list. So I played it during Legion Time Walking, and it was actually in a TGP. So it's one of the few dungeons that I actually spent a lot of time on, but it's not the same version. And yeah, I feel like that. What I'll say the difference between Brackenhide and this one. I do kind of like Brackenhide, but I think there are still like, yeah, you don't necessarily go that way, but there's still lots of like routing options and like pulling options, and you can still pull things in different ways.
Okay. Oh wait, so it did get you did. That's actually really interesting. So I said if they were to bring this back, people would have a different opinion of it, but they did, right? Kind of like in a way.
For TGP.
But you guys,
it was in the Legion Time Walking M+, so you could play it like with the Infernal affix.
Yeah, but I feel like if you guys did that in the TGP and it was part of Legion, whatever, like that's about as close to bringing something back as possible. Like that almost disproves my entire point.
It's just like it's just a couple of us that have played it.
Yeah, but these are your lists,
didn't actually get to
right? These, I mean, that totally makes sense. Okay, I'm gonna do. Okay, I don't think this is gonna be in any of y'all's list, but I'm ready to defend it to the death. My number 8 is Shrine of the Storm.
Ooh.
I have it higher.
Oh, let's go. Okay.
I
Even
have it at number 4.
what? Okay, we will get to that later. All right. Well, we won't talk about that
Everyone hates
now.
Shrine.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. All right. Growl, what is your 8?
I'm preparing to defend myself for this one. My number 8 is Azure Vaults.
Ooh.
I like it.
You have it higher?
I don't have it higher, but I will not attack you for whatever you're about to say, unlike the other two.
Am I winning? Holy shit.
Dorky says he has it higher.
What?
You have Azure Vaults higher?
Wow.
I have it at 6.
Wow. Stop saying where you have it. Okay.
Oh, actually, yeah. I'm not supposed. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not supposed to
Yeah.
say
Okay.
that,
Got it. Okay. So Dorky, what is your 8?
Atal'Dazar.
Oh my god, I
Atal'Dazar.
also have it at 8. Twinsies.
Yo, let's go Dratnos.
Okay. So he has it at 8. I had it at 9. So you that no one else has it. Wait. Do you have it in your list at all, Growl?
No. It's a close one.
Okay. Make your case, Dork.
Oh, me? Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, wait, what are we doing again?
Atal'Dazar.
Oh, dude. I'm just looking at my list.
Wait, guys, what's the key again?
I would say, like, in terms of layout, it has, like, one of the best layouts in any dungeon, where you can go either left or right, and you can loop back around, and you can go down and then back up. You got to choose however you wanted to play the dungeons. There's the whole argument of, like, going left or right. The good players went left, the pogs went right. There was no right answer. It just, like, depended.
There is a right answer. Can I cut you
Well,
off right there? Going right
okay,
fucking
sure, yeah.
sucks. If your opinion of Atal'Dazar...
You say that, but, like, everyone's gonna say
Okay.
right's the right answer.
Okay, whatever. I'm not saying like what's right or wrong. I'm just saying like the gameplay fun value of going right is in the absolute gutter. That side fucking sucks. Like that trash is not fun at all. That I would say like, dude, if Atal'Dazar
Yeah, I agree.
exclusively was going right, it actually wouldn't be on my list. I think going left makes the dungeon fun.
I'll actually side with Dorky here. I think it's one of the few places that it actually gives you a choice that you can decide on your group. Because in a lower level group, like basically the problem with going left is there's casts that if they go off, you're just dead. Like no matter what the key level is, if the fire enchant goes off, you're dead. And so like
pick
as
your
a
poison,
pug,
basically.
you can decide to go right and it's a worse way to go. But if you know that your team isn't going to kick that, then you know that right is the safe way to go. And I agree with you that going left is way more fun. And if you play the pug way, the dungeon's way less fun. But I do think they accomplished something that is very hard to do in dungeons, which is actually give people a choice.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah, because
think,
not only was it left or right, like you could go Razan first, right? You could do a big
Yeah,
pull in the
yeah.
mid first. Like
Get
you
lost
had
in
so
Razan,
much
get
options.
lost middle.
Yeah.
It was pretty cool. And I would say the other thing that made it really cool was the snapping, which is like super controversial. Some people absolutely hate it for that factor, but I personally loved it.
Everyone
especially
here is
during
gonna agree
DFA.
that snapping was a plus, right? I think. Is everyone here pro snapping? I fucking love snapping.
I
don't know if
understand
Dratnos
why
would
they took it
plus
out.
Yeah.
Like it's a pretty weird kind of gameplay. It generally is only good on pulls that are bad without snapping, and they should just fix those pulls to not be bad without snapping.
Yeah, but they won't do
Yeah.
that.
Yeah,
I agree.
but they did
I
it a
agree
little bit
your
with
thought. I
the-
agree with
the
your
swords.
thinking, but I mean, I like it because in general, it's like a time loss, and it's something that you don't want to do, but you do it because it allows pulls that you couldn't otherwise do. So it's like an option.
Yeah, I think
And
where
you
they
can do some
landed on with the
cool
Return of
shit with it.
Atal'Dazar is like fine, because you kind of do a snap with that, right? Like you do the pull where everybody's standing and out of path of the swords,
Yeah,
right?
but it's just such a clunky way of fixing. Like, why couldn't they just have removed the charge from the Juggernauts, right? Like that would boom. right,
Yeah,
fixed.
I
Or
agree.
just
I
make
don't
it
know.
so
I-
that like you can do something.
I think
counterplay it.
it's one of those things where it only feels bad. We were talking about like the whole like paying out on developers things earlier, and like why people got so mad at Nagi was because they had access to MDT, and if you were gonna take it away, then they would be super mad. But if it was like that from the beginning, they wouldn't care. It's the same thing with this, right? Like snapping feels bad because we felt what it was, and now when you do it without it, it feels like they removed something rather than if snapping never existed, then it would probably just be universally higher rated, right?
Well,
Yeah.
you would have to deal with the mechanics first, right? Like had they removed the charges or made them counterplayable, then 100%. But they would not have done that.
Yeah. It can
I want to shout out as well, like, they did a really good job of fixing the double honor guard pull before Volcall that was just horrific the first time Atal'Dazar was
True.
around.
Yeah, that
And
was
now it's
surprising.
like they made it just one honor guard. They made honor guards less bad. Like you can pull that. You don't have to. You can skip it, but you can pull it.
But when they made the last boss worse though at the same time, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
that was bad.
that was a goofy change for high end play, but
That's what
it was
knocked
definitely
mine
true that
out.
that boss
it was
kind of
bad
didn't
for
do
everyone, dude.
anything.
People hated that.
It was
No,
way
no.
worse for
It
casuals.
didn't do anything. No, I was gonna say the opposite. Drados, there's no way. Pretty sure people got farmed by the last.
Here's
boss
here's
in
my
Yeah, but like you go into that place on a low key and it was like just you needed like 10% the throughput that you needed on any other boss to get through it.
Well, yeah, but they also just stepped on a spider and then just died, right?
Yeah,
because they
yeah.
were slowed.
Well, depending on the key level you're doing, those weren't one shots.
I agreed with the idea of that, like, oh, there's no mechanics on this boss because you just kick everything from happening, and they're like, actually, we do want you to deal with this actual mechanic. The issue is that it made the boss too much, right? The slow didn't make sense, and it obviously infinite scaling issue. A large single target attack from the boss that you can't stop is like a huge problem for infinite scaling high mythic plus stuff, right? So, but it is surprising that you're saying that casuals hated it more, because that seems like the exact kind of thing where it wouldn't be an issue on a 20, but would just be
No, it was a massive issue. So basically,
yeah.
what Pogging on Top was like is you would do the dungeon completely fine. You get to the last boss with like probably 15 minutes left because there was like infinite time, and then every single pug would get obliterated by Yasma. They would just like, because like if you don't know the strategy, right? Like the whole strategy of like tailing behind the boss and the tank moves it along, and then you're like leading the spiders. People just like spread all over the place. There were ads spawning everywhere. You would get hit by the slow, and then you're like trying to maneuver around, but you get hit by a spider that's like super hard to see.
Yeah,
It
well,
was
it's an
brutal
added
for-
mechanic, but it was only for high level, right? So like at a low level group, just dealing with the spiders and the movement of the boss was the boss, and it was already challenging for groups that were not organized. And the reason they added it felt like they added it only for high key groups who just knew how to move around and stack and do everything. But for a normal like civilian group, they are already dealing with the spiders and the ads on their own, and that's like enough. And just having the extra dot to keep the healer busy and like worrying about defensives is already way too much.
Yeah, like I remember pogging that place multiple times, and it usually ended up being me soloing the last boss as a tank. It would just be like the entire team dies within like the first minute, and then I'm just fighting a 5-6 minute long boss or more.
okay. Just want to throw out something. Do you remember when you guys first started saying civilian? And how like people in Twitch chat would just lose their mind over that, like it would just make people so mad. They're like, "Oh my god, this
now it's a bit.
elitist." Now it's a bit, but I haven't been streaming on YouTube for very long, and I think this is the first time someone said
Oh.
civilian on my stream in YouTube, and I just noticed you said that. I like browse over my YouTube chat, and this guy goes, "Civilian group, haha, ego is real." He said civilian. He said civilian. That is insane. So they're like going through the same process that Twitch did, but just like I don't know. I thought that was
That's
funny.
good.
Okay, so Atal'Dazar cemented in stone in 3 lists, I believe, in 8 and 9. I'm surprised Atal'Dazar wasn't top 5 on like someone's list. I would have guessed that before coming into this, but interesting nonetheless.
I feel so for me it was pretty high, but I think it got soured a little bit by it being brought back.
Okay, my number 7, and I think someone's gonna have it higher, is Underrot.
I have it higher.
I have it as the same.
Okay, so Dorky has it as at 7. Cool. All right, Growl, what is your 7?
My 7 is Lower Kara.
I have that way higher, but a cultured pick nonetheless. Dratnos, what is your 7?
The Motherlode.
Ooh, I like this pick a lot, and I didn't even have it in my consideration, but
I have it higher.
You have it higher. Okay, cool. Yeah, I actually definitely have no negative feelings about Motherlode. I'm surprised I didn't consider it more. All right, I guess we have to keep going then. My 6 is Waycrest Manor.
I have it higher.
Nope.
Growl, is it higher? Okay. Growl, what is your 6?
My 6 is Algethar Academy.
I have that higher. All right, we're getting into some bangers.
Okay.
Your 6, Dorky?
Azure Vault. Wait, you talked about this already.
We did not
No,
talk about
we
it.
didn't talk about it
We
because
Oh,
it
well,
was
we
higher.
wait.
we were
Yeah.
going to
Oh, yeah,
wait
right,
because
right.
you had it
Right,
higher.
That's the rules of this. If you
Yeah,
don't
is
remember.
this the highest Azure Vault? 6? I'm really surprised this is almost near your top 5 actually. Like I know how you feel about it. I mean, just go ahead and defend it. I know how you feel about it, but I'm still surprised.
Yeah, it's a super bag. I mean, they made great changes to it. They made it so that you can pull and counterplay the mobs. You can pull however big you want as long as you have like the stops for it, which can be kind of oppressive for pugs, but they have like made it much easier. And I think bosses were like all right, not like super crazy, but yeah, like they're pretty all right. And I really enjoy how you can do a bunch of different stuff in there. You can like snap mobs across the platform. You can jump platforms. You can pull a bunch of froggers. I love the froggers. Last boss is also much better now. It used to be complete dog water with the whole slow mechanic, but it's actually quite manageable now. And I'll take fair all across the board.
It just seems like a worse. Like again, I care way more about this I think than other people, but I thought it was really cool that you could jump down and pull bosses and things in a different order. And it loses a lot of value for me that they made that no longer a thing, personally.
Well, they only changed it for going from was it the second platform, like the one on the bottom to last boss, or not last boss, but the second to last boss.
Isn't
So they changed it, but not like entirely.
Can you still do the second to last boss before the second boss?
No.
Yeah, that's the part that because then you could like go back and do the like pincer maneuver that people were doing in like the MDI stuff with like all that trash after the boss was dead. I thought that was sick.
Yeah, you can no longer do that.
Any other, you guys, you had Azure Vault on your list as well, Growl. I'm assuming you agree with all that?
Yeah, I echo everything Dorky says. I think two things I want to emphasize in there is being able to pull exactly how your group wants and is capable of. You have the rock guys at the beginning that you can add if you get the birds, but you don't have to.
Oh, good point.
Like you can group the flowers, but you don't have to. There are a lot of kicks, but it feels like you're under control of how much that you pull. Now, you might not if you're pugging and you have a tank. The other thing that Dorky didn't mention that I think is in Azure Vaults that should be a staple in every dungeon is when you respawn, there's a guy that ports you to all of the graveyards at the start of the dungeon, and you get a speed buff until you get in combat. I think that was there was a huge problem with Azure Vaults in beta that it was way too big, and they added that, and I'm just like, oh my god, that actually makes the dungeon so much better for high keys and pugs.
Yeah, the
and
ports
I
are
think
nice.
that should be in every dungeon.
Major facts.
Yeah, I can literally port to every single boss you kill, which is like such a huge plus.
Dratnos, you don't
And
have
USB
Azure
was-
Vault, right?
Yeah, I don't hate the pick. I also found it to be hurt by the change of making it so you can't like jump around anymore. That's something I am sad about as well, like you, but I do agree with all these things being good about it. I also think, okay, it's nice that you got the port out of the graveyard, but there are still, if you wipe on Azure Blade, you're still looking at a minute to get back there, which is tough.
Yeah, that part kind of sucks.
Okay. Dratnos, what is your 6?
Mine is also Algethar Academy.
Academy. Okay. I will have that higher, so we'll talk about that later. All right, that is my, what is it? We're at 5? Okay.
Yeah.
I'm willing to defend it. My 5 is Halls of Valor.
I have it higher.
Really? Okay.
Oh, wow.
All right. I will we'll go back to that later. All right, Growl, what's your 5?
All right.
My 5 is Waycrest Manor.
Okay. I had that already, but it wasn't as high. Does anyone have Waycrest higher than 5?
Nope.
All right, let's get into it. Growl, what's your take?
I like that there was a lot of variety to routing. I think that once you sort of got to the courtyard, it felt like you could open the dungeon up and do bosses in different orders and do stuff in like however you wanted to. I don't like a lot of the changes they made in this current version. I would prefer to be picking the one that was in BFA. I think all of the boss fights are like pretty cool and challenging in different ways. Besides the tree boss in the current version that they brought back, nothing really felt super oppressive or like unfun. I think there's just a lot of diversity in just like the trash. Like you can pull big, and again, it sort of has the halls factor of like, you know, okay, there's the witches that you have to kick, and there's the frontals you got to look out for, and the leapers that you got to heal. And yeah, I think it's just an overall really, really fun dungeon. I think it's one of the coolest like aesthetics too.
Yep.
Like it's like the haunted house thing. I do think the
Yeah.
low ceilings can be annoying in the Z-axis problems, and I think if it wasn't for that stuff, I think that would be higher on the list for me.
Yeah, that's I think where my list is going to differ from a lot of people is I just in general, even as a melee, am not bothered by the like camera angle affix stuff. Like just in general, like that doesn't matter to me. So like that, like even I'm like have a higher opinion of like Grimrail even than people. Like I know people hated Grimrail. Like Grimrail's not on my list. You know, I didn't hate it because of that. You mentioned the aesthetic and the theme. Like everything, they perfectly executed the haunted house. Like from the bosses you're fighting to the music to just the art of the place. Like it maybe is the best dungeon at doing that of any dungeon, and I think that is major points for me. You mentioned being able to go in different directions. You don't really see that a lot on live because like usually people have like a determined easiest route and then you like try to just repeat it. And the main reason you repeat it is because people are used to it and like success chance is higher with people doing things multiple times, right? But like you saw the MDI, that's where you're really going to see people like iterate on different routes and stuff. And I think going into the global finals, I want to say every single team did that dungeon differently in some way. And that just shows you how much choice there is and stuff like that. And as someone doing the dungeons that way, that is just so fun. That again, big theme in my list. Major points from me for there. But you two, Dranos and Dorky, you guys don't, or no, Dranos had it at 10. Dorky,
10.
you don't have it at all. What's your
No, yeah, I don't have it at all. So I did like Waycrest a lot before, but what really brought down the dungeon was bringing back this season. I think the tree boss is like the
Tree
worst
boss,
boss
that's
we've
it.
ever made.
That's
It
the
was,
reason it's in 10 for me and
yeah,
not higher.
it's so unbelievably bad that like I just could not put Waycrest in my top 10. Like I think if they completely scrapped the tree boss, I would be like super down to put Waycrest in top 10. But it just like completely soured my last season where I was like, all right, I guess we gotta do Waycrest again. Time to put on your PvP trinkets and do some like super
Yeah, that
cringe
was so
activity.
bad.
Someone gets targeted multiple times. Yeah.
How did they let that be a thing? Like if you were actually doing the dungeons, it was clear it was so oppressive. Like I believe back when Waycrest was out last time, that stun existed, but like either it didn't do as much damage to you or it had less health so you could kill it quicker. I don't know what it was, but the last
You
time
could cap form it as well, and then they were
was a lot
like, "Oh, we
weaker,
fixed it.
yeah.
You can't cap form it anymore."
yeah, it's like I don't know what it was, but like it is just 3 times as oppressive as it's ever been, and it dominated that entire key and comps. People wouldn't go in there without mages. Like it was like
Yep.
before mages were even super bis. So yeah, I don't know. I think
It was
completely
fine before
agree.
too. Like that's the thing. Like before it was like, all right, your tank gets his ass fucking beat to death, and then there's the fire that you have to light up occasionally, right? Which would shit on the entire group. So there's like stuff going on, and it's not like it needed that change, and that just like completely ruined the dungeon. I mean, I will say though, like they definitely made some good changes to Waycrest. Like obviously the whole door being RNG. I guess that was another factor that like made it kind of bad because like the previous version was not great, but this version is also not great. So I just can't put Waycrest in my top 10.
Yep.
It's a cool dungeon though.
Fair points all around. We are at Dorky's 5.
I have Freehold.
Ooh, I have it higher for sure. Okay, Dratnos, what's your 5?
Freehold.
Okay, wow.
Hey, yo,
2
let's
5
go.
freeholds. That is cool. All right, so moving on to my 4. My 4 is Algethar Academy, and I believe this is the highest anyone has
Highest?
Algethar. Yeah, I think this was just again thematically super awesome. Suki was playing WoW at the beginning of this expansion, and she was like saying voice lines from Algethar Academy from like the last boss IRL and shit. And I just think like that having an impression on a new player like that is super important. Sometimes we lose sight of that. I think the tree boss is one of the best dungeon bosses ever. That dungeon had everything. It had mass AoE. It didn't have any pulls that were super annoying, besides maybe like the way the bird trash was handled before the bird boss. And also the little mini boss to jump around was kind of annoying. And then like this boss had like a solidified position within the game. And then the MDI came out and people figured out like watching this was like must see TV. Like every time a good team was coming in here, they were doing something different. They were doing a different route. They were pulling a different boss, obviously non-linear from the beginning. And you were able to like see different snaps and all kinds of stuff. I don't know. I don't know. I just think Algethar is one of the best dungeons they've ever made. That's my case.
Yeah, so I don't have it on my list, but that's mostly because like I just couldn't really fit it in the list. And I mean, looking back at this, I probably would put it on my list and like maybe replace one of my 7, 8, or 9. And like I agree with mostly what you had to say with how big pulls and tree boss, one of the best bosses, super cool dungeon too, very nice thematically. The biggest thing that holds it back for me is how much required mobs there were. You basically had to clear the entire Lasher area to spawn the boss, and then you had to clear the entire book area to spawn Veximus, and then you have to just like sit there and kill the birds to spawn bird boss, and there's a bridge too, you have to kill the sentry, and that takes away a lot of points for me because like you essentially do the same thing in the dungeon every single time for the most part. Like obviously there are going to be some variances, but the pulls are fun and the bosses are good. So yeah, I would probably have put it in my top 10 looking back at this, but not like super high.
Okay, so you're a fan. And then any other takes from Dratnos and Growl about Algethar?
Yeah, I think the bosses, like each boss could be the hard part of the 4 bosses, and sometimes it could feel bad. Like sometimes it could be the bad kind of hard part, depending on the season, depending on your comp, right? Like you could be playing Kroth with a squishy tank in season 1 or whatever to it, and feels like really hard and like kind of maybe too hard. Or you could be doing first the tree boss without a poison dispel without good AoE. Veximus got really hard on like High Tyran. Last boss was an interesting one as well because they kind of tried to change that several different times over the course of the expansion, right? It went from 4 stacks to 3 stacks to 4 stacks, or it went from 3 stacks to 4 stacks to 3 stacks to 4 stacks, and they like changed how it works with like the instant damage hit and making the things. But I think they landed in a good place on that fight now. So I don't know. I mean, there were some parts I didn't like. I echo Dorky's complaints about some of the pulls, the Guardian Elemental or whatever, being a little bit kind of on rails and kind of taking you out of the experience. But I mean, yeah, the vibe in there is fantastic. There's so many great pulls. There are the bosses have the potential to be great as well, depending on, as long as you're not doing it with like a comp or a season where one of the bosses feels like super oppressive, which again, that could happen with pretty much any of the four of them.
Okay.
That's some good points.
Hard agree. So this is actually interesting. There's a lot of Dragonflight dungeons on these lists, and maybe more to come. That's interesting, and not a lot
I
of
think that's where
Shadowlands.
we differ more from other players, because I think a lot of players dislike Dragonflight dungeons because they feel like there's too much going on. But for us, it's a little bit more manageable, and when you can manage them, it's fun.
Yeah, people were saying, like, I had someone in YouTube chat, obvious YouTube L here, but they said recency bias. Usually recency bias in WoW is usually the other way.
Yeah, it's usually
Yeah,
opposite.
yeah, like,
I was about to say,
dude,
like,
Freehold would have been so high if it hadn't come back a couple seasons ago for a lot of us as well, right? Like
That's 100%
Freehold at
true.
5 for me and Dorky is that would have been much higher if it hadn't just been back, right?
Yeah. Okay, where are we? We had 5s. We did my 4. Okay, so it's Growl's 4.
Dranos 5?
It's
Wait,
we did
Mine's
Dranos
also
as 5
Freehold.
as Freehold. Yeah.
Yeah.
Growl, what's
Okay,
your
yeah.
4?
My 4 is also Freehold.
Okay, have that higher. What's your 4, Dork?
Okay. Dranos Storm, which should be the highest.
Oh, Shrine, you said? Yeah.
Shrine. Yeah, so me and you were the only people to have Shrine of the Storm, and
Yeah.
very cultured take. Go ahead, and I'll
Yep,
let
this
you
is a
start
very
off.
hot one. So Shrine of the Storm was absolutely brutal for most players. First of all, it was a 42-minute long dungeon, and this is like probably my only 42-minute dungeon here. Well, actually, no, that's not true. There's more. But it was really rough for the most part. Like all the trash in the beginning, there were a lot of kicks, a lot of stops. It was a pretty high cognitive dungeon for something from BFA. The bosses were extremely rough for most players. It required coordination. You couldn't just like pug it. Like second boss, for example, you had to constantly kick the cast. You had to have like a kick rotation. You had to dodge for tornadoes. There were so many skips you had to do, and pugs hate skipping. Last boss was also extremely coordination heavy. If you let any cast go off, it was basically GG. But what made it really fun for me was my experience in that dungeon specifically. I was like kind of one usually in charge of like doing all the types of like routing and the pulls. I pulled freaking massive there. I'm pretty sure no other group in the world was pulling as big in that dungeon at the time. And trying to like figure out all the skips, all the tech. Affixes were also terrible there too, so I forgot about that.
You have to sell your number 4, Dorky. You have to sell it.
It was just the experience, really. Like the experience, like just being able to coordinate and being able to do all the pulls was super satisfying, and it was a major challenge for sure. I mean, it was purely just nostalgia and just like me really enjoying how it played.
Yeah, I think this is I love Shrine. Also, probably same thing as Dorky. Well, Dorky, you did high keys a little bit in BFA, right, as well?
I only did high
A
keys.
little bit.
Oh yeah, okay. So the thing, I didn't do any high keys. My experience in BFA was very, very, very unique, where the only weekly keys I did for loot was exactly Freehold and sometimes Underrot, and I didn't do any other dungeons. And then I did the MDI at the end, and So I actually have like never done what was that snake dungeon from that? Like, because
Temple of Sithralis.
yeah, because I just wasn't in the MDI, right? So like I only had the experience of doing this with a coordinated group and like mass pulling it. And Shrine was the most goated MDI dungeon. It was like you just snapped everything at the beginning into the goblet. Every pull was massive, or it was massive on top of a boss. There was a ton of different choice you could do, and the length of it didn't really matter as much because we were doing it in like 15 minutes, right? So this was my list, and I had to figure out how much fun I had in each one of these dungeons, and Shrine was like way, way, way up there. And if anything, it's like lower on my list because I assume people would be super mad about it, and I'm glad someone else put it on their list because I just enjoyed every second I was in this dungeon. But I also fully understand if your experience was not doing like coordinated group keys, and your experience was doing dungeons for like weekly loot, and you went into Shrine out of comms, you probably got farmed hard, and your experience in there being negative makes a lot of sense to me, but I just never experienced that one time, and it was
One of the worst pug keys.
Yeah, it was only ever fun for me, so huge
I
Shrine.
actually,
same.
I have some good stuff to add about Shrine as well. I think like that dungeon had some really sick parts, right? Like the last boss, the healer debuff as well, was some really engaging and interesting gameplay that was offered
cool
by
as
it.
Good
It was
point.
also frustrating if you know, it was one of those things where bad healer, bad group, any kind of situation like that would be frustrating. But I remember like good healers loved that part of that dungeon. This was also a dungeon that really suffered from the lack of graveyard updating, right? Like if you wiped on the second boss, you'd use like 4 shroud skips to get there over the course
good
of the last
point.
20
Yeah.
minutes.
Oh, yeah.
And you would
Yeah,
just
that
you'd
was
hit release
GG.
spirit, and then you would walk out of the dungeon. And if you did anything else, you would get a card in the mail from the Certified Psychopaths of America welcoming you to their ranks.
Yup.
Is that a club? Like, is that a thing?
I'm starting it up. Anyone want a founding member with me? Signing the guild charter.
The CPA.
That's
Bunch
right.
bunch of accountants. All right.
That's our main audience is confused accountants.
Okay. We have Dratnos. What's your 4?
Halls of Valor.
Okay, so we have I had it at 5. You had it at 4. Make your Halls take.
Dude, Halls was sick. Okay, so I want to talk mostly about this as one of the best examples of like a revamp that extremely succeeded. And they took a dungeon that had good and bad things about it, and they made the good things better, and they took away the bad things, and it became super fun, right? Like the RP at the end got killed. There were a bunch of pulls back in Legion that you would go into Halls of Valor, and it was basically like, okay, either we can't pull this, or we're gonna pull this, and we're gonna do the Legion thing where we CC it until we kite it, right? And that's how we handle these pulls. And over the course of Legion, they made some adjustments, and they were like, okay, we're going to reduce the mob density in this area. You know, we're gonna try and fix this a little bit. But coming into Dragonflight, they came in and they were like, all right, like we're gonna make these mobs all reasonable mobs that you can pull but don't have to, and you can go in there now and like, obviously, you know, it's not non-linear. You do have to go to both sides. You have to. It's not like one of those ones where there's 6 different sections of the dungeon that you pull from 3 of, but you kind of can. Like, you can skip around a little bit. You can get all your trash in the Fields of the Eternal Hunt, or you can get it in the hall, right? Like, there's a lot of different options there. The boss fights are pretty cool. There were some problems with some of these boss fights, you know, over the course of this dungeon's history, certainly.
Oh, yeah.
Persia, as well, is a boss that was frequently, like, that was the numbers check boss of that expansion for a while. And it was often, depending on the group, it was tough when you were pugging halls when it came back, for sure. So it wasn't perfect. I think this dungeon was sweet for, like, it was a fun weekly key. If anything, the only reason I didn't often pick it as a weekly key is because it was a long key, and so you would just choose a shorter key over it. But it was a fun key, and the MDI viewer experience for it was sick as well. There was all kinds of creative, like, awesome innovation that we saw when this was in MDI at the start of this expansion too, so it gets good points on that for me also.
Yeah.
Dranos, would you have said the same before the rework? Like, how do you
No. I think this one shot up on the rework.
Same,
like, I think Halls was a
100%
pretty
same.
bad or like mid Legion dungeon, but I think this was one where they took a dungeon that, you know, again, they made the positives better and they made the negatives largely go away.
Yeah, I completely agree. I'm glad you said that, because everything you said was like completely untrue in the Legion version. It was so bad during Legion. I hated this dungeon, but the one they brought back was actually like surprisingly good. In fact, like I probably would have put it higher if it was just this version of Halls, but like the Legion version kind of soured my taste for sure.
I've used the like brought back dungeons to like almost completely remake my opinion of the dungeon. Like Court of Stars completely did. Like, Court of Stars would have been way higher on my list if this was, or existed on my list, if this was in Legion. Like, bringing dungeons back gives you perspective, because just a lot of Mythic Plus has happened between then and now, you know? Like, so seeing it ranked against the current things, I think matters a lot. And then the changes they make based on what they've learned matter a lot. I agree with everything Dratno said, except I want to mention one other thing that definitely gives points for me. This wasn't an experience I had, but an experience as a viewer, where watching Echo, like, buzzer beater that pull the entire forest onto the Four Kings strat.
Has Echo popped theirs just yet? I don't quite see what.
They might be snapping
Echo's
this
not killing the
somewhere.
trash? Are they snapping this to the Four Kings?
Yeah, they're all the bulls all of a sudden, and the grizzly bears. This is going to be very dangerous for now to survive. They are carrying them all the way to the kings. We actually see a mass route coming in here. They might kill them while the RP is happening.
They could pull them into
Do
the
they have the
Four
beers,
Kings here, and if
though?
they're able to pull this off, they do. They did. They had the beers. You can see the nameplates are orange. That means they got the beers off. Echo has found a way to snap the forest to the Four Kings. No one else has even thought of doing this. Now it's a question. There's the lust. Here comes the bulls. Here comes the forest.
Where there's like even an extra layer of fucking around with this kind of stuff that just no one messed with after that. But that was so cool and completely unexpected that added some points to it for me too. That was like one of the coolest dungeon cooks I've ever seen, like maybe the best one. And I thought that was awesome.
What the hell? There's definitely way cooler ones. But also,
really?
Halls of Valor. Yeah, what the hell?
Like,
what about all the shit that people did in like even the Blackrook Hold snap from the season?
Or
was way
Blackrook
cooler
Hold with
than
the
that.
Arcane Mage?
Yeah, like there were so many things that were so much cooler in my opinion.
Wow.
That was like, kind of basic. I'm just like surprised nobody even thought about doing that.
I just never even thought. I think people tried to snap it through the portal, but it was just like no one could figure out how to do it, and then they just did. I don't know. It was sweet. It was cool.
Oh yeah, I just felt like it was like super basic. That's why. But
Just be basic.
I
Then.
was gonna say. No, yeah, it was anything like they didn't do anything special. They just kind of just like pulled the mobs and feared and then melded or whatever and just walked through and mass roots. But I also thought Halls of Valor was like super cool the first time I did the dungeon. I remember when I first did it, I was like, wait, this dungeon is like probably my favorite looking dungeon of all time.
Is the theme way up there too? Like I don't really care about the like
For me, 100%.
mythology theme and shit, but like I feel like it probably nailed that. Growl, you didn't have it on your. Are you a Halls of Valor hater or are you?
Yeah,
a-
I'm gonna take the other side. This dungeon
Okay.
sucked. It was way too long. There was no checkpoints. The runbacks were insane. Every single mechanic was like so punishing. There were so many frontals that would just kill you, so many casts that would just kill your party. Like your healer misses one global in the Herja bubble and you die. You forget to press one defensive and you die. The entire last 10 minutes of the dungeon was terrible. Like you run up the thing and now you just have to fight these mini bosses. And if it's a pug, you're fighting them one by one. Then you fight two bosses that do nothing. It's literally like 10 minutes of single target dummying. I think the theme was like okay, like I don't really mind it, but I think like they tried to like make it epic. Where if they just would have chopped off the last two bosses in that whole area, what I mean, obviously that defeats the lore purpose of the dungeon, but like I think the forest area with Fenrir is cool. I think Fenrir was a cool boss. I think it was cool how you kind of like fight him and then he like halfway through he goes away and then you can decide to like
Oh,
do
true.
a pull and get your cooldowns back. Like that was kind of something that they've never really done in a dungeon or that I remember. I think that whole area is cool. I think especially miserable part of the Halls remake was the big, and I don't know what they did before because I didn't play Legion, but the big guys that had that aura or whatever, and you basically could never ever pull any of the big guys that would patrol. And if you were playing in anything but like a super organized
yeah.
group, you would just pull the big guy
Oh,
and
yeah,
just
yeah, that was
immediately
good.
wipe. If it was bolstering, you're dead. Like a lot of
That's
people
fair.
don't remember that because you're playing with good groups that are skipping, but like that big guy who's walking around, like you just have the random hunter in your group that pulls or the shaman totem, and it's just like, well, okay, well, yeah, now we wipe and now we run back from the Pico start of the dungeon.
Dude, that was fucking
You know what's
crazy.
even-
Growl didn't have his hand up in class or anything. He was just sitting there, just fucking loading ammo into a gun, basically, while we were all praising Halls of Valor, and then he just fucking gadded all over that dungeon when he was asked to.
You know-
that was crazy.
You know what I think it is? It's because Growl didn't do the Legion version, which he would have felt so much worse about. Like the Legion version was fucking trash, man. Like
Yeah.
everything Growl said, it's amplified that by 2 times.
It's
But I
like
feel
if
like
Growl
I-
was my if Growl was my 6th grade teacher, he would have just been like, "Wow, this guy's really stupid." But if he'd seen me in 5th grade when I was even stupider, he would have then been like, "Oh my god, there's so much improvement here," and that would be the takeaway.
Yeah,
Yeah.
this is some Legion nostalgia that's fueling this Halls of Valor right here.
Yeah, I mean it's like reverse nostalgia.
But the
It's
funny
like-
thing is, you can't even say it's nostalgia because literally what you're trying to sell up is the fact that they made it so much better and it's still
yeah,
bad.
yeah.
Okay, I won't say it's bad, but I think this is like one of the most mid dungeons they've ever made.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that you didn't see it before and are only judging it based on now, I feel like gives a lot of your claims a lot more legitimacy because we are removed from that bias of the 6th and 5th grade stupid kid teacher thing, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a good take. I think if I were to go back, you would have made me put mine down my list a little bit more. You're making me feel a little bit like an idiot here. Wait, did I? Oh, Dratnos had it higher than me. We're chilling.
I don't feel like an idiot. I still like.
Yeah,
the,
I don't know
I
why
mean,
you guys have
I
it in top
agree. The
10.
reason it's
That's
4 and not
crazy.
higher is from those things. But like, I agree with most of the points being the negatives of the dungeon. But I stand by it.
The student outgrows the teacher.
That's based.
All right,
I
we
respect
have are we on 3s?
That's right.
All right, so there's actually a lot of dungeons that are different in our top 3, as I can tell from just keeping track in my head, I think. There's one that I think will be in all of ours, but I'm going to start with mine, and I don't know if anyone else is going to have this. My number 3 is Lower Kara, and it's like strongly 3. Like this is a top 3 dungeon of all time for me and always has been. Does anyone else have this?
No, I think
Just
you
you.
just go fish.
Just
here.
me. Okay.
Go fish.
All right. Yeah, this is not the one I thought you guys would have. I absolutely love this dungeon. It is the peak of non-linear. I think it's the best non-linear, or it's the best dungeon at being non-linear ever. Especially when this was out the first time, you could go to like any boss first. There was crazy strats where you'd like kill the first boss, not kill that trash after, and then die, and then like release on the other side and change position. And you would like, it would just be a faster way to move, and the death timer wouldn't have mattered. I think when they brought it back, there wasn't as much creativity as there used to be. Maybe because the dungeon just had more time to get figured out. People were better at Mythic Plus by then. But I just enjoyed all of these pulls. I think it's one very similar to stuff we've talked about earlier, where if you were going to gauge this based on public community perception, like especially when they brought it back, this dungeon absolutely farmed people, and it was just not a dungeon you could do for loot and was kind of harder to get into. But I think it was a one that when you did with a group, you would generally have a good time in here. It's just and again, theme, there may not be a better executed theme in WoW than what Karazhan did.
Well, I mean, it's literally like the TBC raid that everyone's like super fond about. Like Kara at its time was fucking amazing back in TBC, and them bringing back was definitely a huge nostalgia factor.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't even play in TBC. So my entire experience with this is just it trying to do what it's trying to do, and I think it achieves that at an extremely high level. I didn't really like the other side of Kara, but I thought this side was sweet. All right, I'm assuming you guys are none of you have it in your top 10, so I'm interested to hear your guys' opinions on it.
So I'm gonna say I don't like lower Kara. I mean, it was alright. Okay, I don't want to say I don't like it, but I think the biggest problem is it's way too buggy and messy, and it was probably like confusing as hell. I felt like none of the bosses were intuitive because you had the first boss that would rotate. You just had no idea what the hell the boss did.
Morose?
Like,
both.
No,
actually, they all rotated. They kind of all rotated, right?
Defense.
Like Morose.
Well, that
and
too. Yeah, that also rotated. Yeah, it was
Yeah.
like so hard to figure out what is even happening. I still don't know how two of the fights work. Like I know how the broom and cauldron and whatever the hell fight works, but not the other two. And then there was also just like so much ninja pulling, so much shit pulling from through the floor. There were a lot of mobs, which was fun, but at the same time, it's like, what do these mobs even do? And the other bosses too, like Morose, you had to know exactly what each boss or like mini boss, like each of the council part did, and that was also pretty confusing. The Horseman too, whatever his name is, Atonement or whatever, that was also extremely confusing. That was a terrible boss.
Yeah.
The only thing that was like, intuitive was Maiden. And even then, like, it wasn't like super intuitive for the first time. I'm pretty sure like most people got stunned or repentanced.
Also, Maiden had a really hard. It's maybe designed as the like hardest boss to do without comms, with an actual legit DPS check shield and the need of the tuning to like actually have your cooldown spread out, like that's something that probably farmed a bunch of people. Also, I forgot to mention this earlier, I actually forgot, Growl actually did have this on his list as well. I didn't want it. No Growl erasure over here. I'll allow him to defend it. Yeah, he had lower Kara at 7. He had it at 7. Yeah, his lower was lower.
Yeah, and one other thing is you also just had no idea where the hell you were half the time. The layout of the dungeon was kind of confusing.
All right, Growl, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I'll actually chime in. So I had it at 7. I like this dungeon. Now keep in mind, I only played it during the bringback. I didn't play in Legion. What Dorky said about you get lost in the dungeon, I'm actually going to give that a plus. I think with how formulaic and how standard all the dungeons are, having something that actually feels like a dungeon with like different paths and like routes, and you don't actually know where stuff leads and different things lead to different areas is super, super cool. I also thought that there were also, lots of different routings and different pull sizes, and you could pull really, really big, lots of trash in there. But I also agree with Dorky that there were problems with it, especially in Pugs. I think the less organized group that you played with, the harder it was. The bosses definitely had a very steep learning curve. I think there were obviously mobs that were great to pull and mobs that were, bad to pull. And I think that overall, I think it's a really cool dungeon, but I played it way less than everyone else did. And also keep in mind, the season that it was brought back was Shrouded, right? Where you like get the buff and you stack up and you have like Omega Haste, and that also like makes the routing and pulling
such a
lot
good
more
point.
Interesting as well. That a lot of people who, if they didn't play that take or that era, might not have the same take.
Wait,
so I think. Remember Shrouded, where you have to find the ghosts and you kill them and you get the stacking buffs?
Yeah, well, I just think you're
Yeah.
really right about that too, and I wonder, this is kind of a broader retrospective thing, but I wonder how our dungeon opinions have changed, or how much it impacted this list, that like some of these dungeons existed with really, really good seasonal affixes, and some dungeons we only saw with really bad ones,
But yeah, overall, I think it was definitely a cool dungeon. Like, I can 100% see how someone would have it in top 3, but I think it's not good enough to be in the top.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, so moving on to Growl's 3.
I don't think I'll have much contention on this. My number 3 is Gambit.
I have Gambit higher.
I have Gambit higher.
All right, cool. Dorky?
I have Sanguine Depths.
Woo! I was not expecting that.
I'm
Really?
expecting Growl to say he has it higher.
I have it higher.
Wow.
there we go.
There we go.
Whoa. Oh my god.
Sanguine Depths is a banger.
Okay, that is
Hey,
that
Dranos?
I would not have guessed.
I
that.
do not have that higher.
Did I just lose all my points with the people after that lower Kira? And
Yeah, the Halls of Valor defense.
Yeah, that is
Goodbye,
fucking insane. I mean, I
enjoyed being...
I can't even have. I mean, I guess we'll wait. I was about to talk about Sanguine, but we have to wait. Dratnos, what's your 3?
Tazavesh Streets.
I do not have that higher. Does anyone else have Streets at all?
I don't have it at all.
All right, talk about
Alright,
Tazzy Streets.
Look, that dungeon was cool, man. It passed the vibe check with flying colors, like the things you're talking about Algethar being great for people zoning in and being like, wow, this place is sick. For me, I don't think there was necessarily any dungeon that did that better than Streets, because like Gambit was cool, but Gambit wasn't in the Tazavesh City part, which was so cool. And there were a couple of pulls that were somewhat suspicious in there. I'll give you guys that. There were some mobs that they could have changed, but the fights in there, I think they have tried with a lot of dungeons. Like Dawn of the Infinite, you can see with a lot of these bosses, they've tried to make interesting kind of raid-style boss fights, and I think they've never done it better than they did in Tazavesh. You have a fight like Solia, where it's like, these are actual mechanics going on. You have to actually think about how you want to... Or not Solia, sorry. What's the end one? So Asmi or whatever, the end of Streets boss, where it's like dividing the room up and you're porting around with portals and using the color thing. I think that like the boss fights were actually interesting and engaging and mechanically, cool without actually being like brutally hard or overtuned numerically either. So again, there were some parts of this dungeon that were mid at best, but the highs were very high for me, and the vibe was fantastic.
I hated the first boss. That was my only thing.
Oh
Like,
man, that was one of the worst bosses they've ever
Yeah,
made.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, look, but it's not like you had to kill the first boss to get to the rest of the dungeon. I guess you kind of did, if you want to think about it.
You absolutely did.
What
What
are
do you
you
mean? You
fucking
could've even
talking
opened the
about?
All right. Maybe that is
What
true.
are you saying here, Giles?
yeah,
Yeah.
that boss was a fucking
Okay, don't
huge
be
thing.
that
I think that boss being replaced with an average Mythic Plus dungeon boss would have this on every single one of our lists, though. Pretty
No,
sure.
no.
That's
I
fair.
also thought Menagerie was a pretty
Yeah,
annoying
Menagerie
boss. It was
is the
so
music
annoying. I
boss.
hated that fight.
Dude, the music
I mean,
boss
the music
was,
boss wasn't
cool
even a
only
fight.
the first-
I thought the
know.
music boss was whatever. It was not even.
You
a
guys
fight.
didn't like
It
that you
was-
could randomly get the like RNG spawn path or whatever to cost 20 seconds and change who won an MDI match?
I don't remember that. Not gonna lie.
That was some big drama.
Oh yeah, I don't remember that at all.
All I know, speaking of MDI, is that it's interesting that I think, like, especially with Sanguine Depths, I think you guys did, like, some TGP or MDI kind of stuff with that. And I know that some of these dungeons on my list only exist because I did them in the MDI, and I wonder how much my perspective would have changed if I did MDIs with a lot of these dungeons on there, both making them higher and lower. Because, like, you could go from not liking a dungeon at all to thinking it's one of the best just because of interacting with it in that way.
Yeah, my other problems with Streets was there was a little bit too much RP for my liking. There was just too much idle time, too much like trying to figure out how to min-max what you're gonna do during that. But
One thing I was
I
saying-
guess it was alright.
What I wanted to say in Dratnos' defense about the RP was that not only did they reduce some of it from M0, but they also, I felt, gave you enough counterplay to the RP. Like, the RP in some places, I'm not saying it's good, but the RP in some places is just like you're standing there waiting to hear an
Snowball.
NPC talk. But with Streets, it's like, okay, you need to go here to trigger something. So it's like, okay, you split off and you do this and you do this. And there is at least some routing and some counterplay, which I would prefer if that's not really in the dungeon. But if it is in the dungeon, which they're not going to remove it, I think that's the best option, is to have the counterplay. But I think, I don't know, there was just, it felt like a lot of the stuff in that dungeon there was counterplay to, but I think the first boss was just miserable. I think, I don't know, I didn't really like I think the bosses were all, they felt to me like the mega dungeon and doing it in hard mode was meant, like, you were only meant to do it 1 or 2 times. And I think that the first impressions of the bosses was really cool. And then after that, the replayability of the bosses was terrible. Like, even So Asmi with the circles and stuff, like, with the first time you did that, it was one of the coolest things ever. And it was like, man, when you did it on hard mode. But then doing it, like, then you sort of realize what's happening and you're like, okay, well, I just need to see what portal I need to go into and then go into it. And that was literally the only mechanic of the fight.
Yeah. I'm surprised at the amount of Shadowlands stuff on this, on the list, for sure.
Is there really that many?
I mean, between all of our lists, it includes both Mega Dungeons and 2 more Shadowlands dungeons. That's,
I mean, yeah.
what, like
Gambit's just a
30% of the
major hit.
dungeons that were introduced in that expansion? Or 40%? Something like that? Like that's Shadowlands does not have a generally high approval rating, but it's also, you know, one of those recency. And I almost put Mist on my list too. And I think it has generally not highly thought of dungeons.
Yeah, I tried to balance and like have. I think overall I didn't really like move stuff because of that, but I did try and like, you know, like I tried to make sure I had different dungeons or different expansions.
I have like nothing from Legion. I'm looking at this.
Yeah, well, yeah, mine is hard. That's why I kind of threw mine a little bit lower because my Legion experience isn't as fair. But like you had mentioned, you thought there was a lot of Dragonflight dungeons, but I actually think it's like pretty well balanced, and for me at least, leaning more towards VFA.
Dude, I can't wait to hear the Motherlode take and the Sanguine take. That is going to be...
Oh, I'm ready.
that
I'm
is
ready
gonna
for
be
both of them.
Spoilers?
Yeah.
know.
Well, yeah. Someone said they had Motherlode higher earlier.
Yeah, Dratnos put his at 7.
Oh,
And
yeah.
we know that somebody could have it higher.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Are we at 2? My 2? All right. My 2 is Freehold. Everyone's had Freehold. 2 of you had it at 5. 1 of you had it at 4.
Yeah.
So generally high approval rating of Freehold. I'm interested to hear from you 3 whether it being brought back lowered it or increased it. But I think they nailed the theme. This is probably a pretty universally high approval because like a lot of people just did Freehold as their like loot key, and a lot of people are always going to fondly remember keys they did just to like go in on a 20 or back then on a 15 to get gear. Thematically nailed it. Bunch of pirate stuff, big mobs you could pull that were never really doing too much, and you could kind of pull them in any order to make it work. Stuff at the beginning I thought was always a fun big pull you did before the first boss. You definitely loses a little bit of points because like I feel like the first boss was never done super well. I think they made it a little bit better when they brought it back, but and I think this boss got huge points on the first time it was out with Awakened. I think this was one of the cooler Awakened dungeons, and like the amount of stuff you could choose to do on the last boss. That's it. I'm sure everyone has some takes on Freehold, but I just am always happy when it comes into this place, and it's been in 2 BFA. It's been in like 2 seasons so far, like all of BFA, and then it was brought back this expansion, and every single time it was my favorite dungeon that season. So that's why I had it too.
Yeah, by far the biggest thing with Freehold is it is the least cognitive overload dungeon, and I don't think it's even close. There's like almost no kicks to really worry about throughout the entire dungeon, and it's mostly just stay alive, tank damage, pull big, avoid shit, and just blast. I will say though, the bosses kind of sucked in that dungeon. Like I think by far the weakest point of Freehold were the bosses. I feel like Freehold is just super bland to me. It's like vanilla ice cream. Like it's good and I like it, but I don't also feel too strongly about it. But I do think more dungeons should be like Freehold, where it's super open and you can do whatever the fuck you want, and you're not just like overloaded with shit happening.
That is a good point about the bosses. Like I'm just like thinking about each boss singularly, and like I mean the like pit boss, the one where you're fighting the shark guy, like that boss stinks. I don't know if do you feel strongly about like the last boss or the second boss? The second boss with the RNG with Bad Brews is kind of bad.
Dude, you guys remember the second boss back when it rotated weekly and you could get Captain Eudora or not Captain
Oh
Eudora?
Jesus, yeah.
BFA, I think Freehold, the trash design and like the routing was way more cool, but I think the bosses were miserable. And I just want to echo Dorky's statement that everything about the dungeon was so awesome, and the bosses are like what holds it back from being number 1. Like regardless of what era that you think about, like I think the bosses just had major problems.
Yep.
Okay. Yep. Freehold. Everyone likes Freehold. All right. Growl. What's your 2?
Ooh, if I know my co-hosts, I think I'll get contented on this one, but my number 2 is Underrot.
Okay. Does anyone have
I
Underrot
also
higher?
have it at 2.
Okay.
Holy, I
Wait.
have it at 7.
Okay, Dratnos, you have it at 2
I also
as well?
think Dratnos has it. Yeah.
Yeah, I have it at
Okay.
2.
So let's let Dorky do his 2, and then we'll talk about Underrot when we get to Dratnos. What's your 2,
I
Dork?
have Gambit.
I have
Idiot. I have it higher.
I have Gambit higher, yeah.
You have to guess which spot I have it in, but I have it higher than 2.
0 maybe.
Ooh, extra dungeon. Procced an extra one. All right, Dratnos and Growl, what are your all's feelings about the old Underrot?
I'll let Growl go first. I think
Sure.
he's
Right.
higher up.
I think overall, the Underrot is one of the best mixes of everything about Dungeon. I think it's linear enough that you don't get confused and like pugs, but there's enough routing changes of like what you want to pull. I think the second boss room is especially a masterpiece in that you can pull it in tons and tons of different ways, depending on what your group is capable of, what comp you have. I think all of the bosses are different sorts of exercises that none of them felt really super oppressive, except for like maybe the first boss was a lot of kicks. I don't know. Overall, I think just Underrot was like a really, really good dungeon, and I think there's very little that you can say that's bad about it. I think the worst thing that I'll have to say, and I enjoyed the BFA version more, was that they added count that they basically made you pull more of the dungeon, which caused you to pull the weird stuff at the end, like in between third and fourth boss. And I think that trash generally was not good or not really fun. But in BFA, you just could skip all of it because you didn't need to pull that. So overall, I think Underrot's a banger.
Dratty?
Yeah, I think they did make it slightly worse at the end. Like worms would have been kind of fine if they weren't rooted to where they were, but that part just made that area so clunky to navigate. So that is definitely minus some points. But yeah, I think the boss design was generally good in there. You had a little bit of everything, right? Like you had healer check fights, but not really one-shotty fights. I guess you had the big explosion on third boss that was a little bit like that, but it was pretty infrequent, and it was kind of the only thing like it in that place. You had it was a linear dungeon in the sense that you started with boss 1 and you walked through to boss 4, but you could go left and right at the start. You could pull more or less around there. You could go left or right towards the second boss room. You obviously had to pull like the whole second boss room, but then after that you could go left or right to the third boss. You could go left or right to the fourth boss, right? And like all of those options, and either pulling more or less in those areas, skipping more or less, were somewhat supported, depending on whether it was the BFA version or the recent version. They tweaked that a little bit, but the core was still there, and that it was one of those dungeons where you could hold W and be fine, or you could actually like pop open MDT and spend a long time thinking about, okay, actually, where do we want to get these last 10% that we need? And that I think is a really good middle ground between the like fully non-linear and fully linear dungeons. And yeah, I mean, it was a vibe. It was one of those dungeons that you were always kind of happy to see. If anything, that kind of makes it gets close to the Maw of Souls, Shadow Moon Burial Grounds part where it's like actually minus points. Because that season, if you did exclamation point keys and you saw an Underrot, you went to the Underrot, the most recent one, like when it came back in Dragonflight, and that was maybe bad.
Well, I was gonna ask, did it coming back increase or decrease your appreciation of Underrot, or keep it the same?
I think it stayed about the same. Yeah, I think
decrease.
that you think decrease. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with like whatever everyone's been saying, but for me, it definitely decreased it a little bit. It definitely made improvements, but I feel like the whole change towards the end of the dungeon really ruined it. As you mentioned, Dratnos. I will say about Underrot, maybe I should have ranked this higher, because like the more I think about it, I've always used Underrot as like the gold standard for general dungeon design.
Oh, it definitely is.
Remember how I talked about Algethar Academy and how like you had to fight the same stuff every single time? You were basically forced, like you had to fight the bridge, you had to fight the bird, etc. What's really nice about Underrot is you can pick and choose how much you pull and what you pull. Like, even though every single player is going to be pulling roughly the same mobs, like, yeah, you're going to be pulling blobs and swarmers, etc., lashers, but if you were a not as experienced group, you could have pulled less lashers, you could have pulled, maybe a blob and like one swarmer. Or if you were a really good group, you could have pulled the entire like half of Krog's room and then do another half and just go boss right after. And I think that choice that you can make is like such a well designed in a dungeon. Aside from that, I also really like how, how we've talked about in the Odyssey, each mob has like one mechanic that players have to deal with. That goes really hard in Underrot, and I wish more dungeons did that.
Yeah, I probably could have had it higher too. Big shout out to the second room being an open canvas that you can do in any way you want, like the one before the second boss.
That's such a good example as well of like the mobs do stuff. Like every mob does something, so it's not like the Freehold cheat code of just make the mobs not actually do anything. The mobs do stuff, and you can still pull like different numbers of them, and you have options. It's so good.
All right, we are now to the ones. I think Dratnos and I have both the same number one, so we'll discuss mine when we get to his, but my number one is Gambit. And I want to hear Growls, because if I'm keeping track of things in my head a lot, Growl's about to fucking spit some crazy shit. So, Growl, what is your number one?
My number one dungeon of all time is Sanguine Depths.
Hell yeah.
Okay,
there it is.
Let the good people know. Speak that good word.
Alright, so aside from like needing a covenant, which I don't really factor in, Sanguine Depths had what I think is by far the most interesting and cool mechanic in any dungeon ever. which was the lanterns that you pull mobs to, and the more mobs that you pull in the lanterns, you get a damage buff, and not like some little 5% versatility, I'm Algethar. You would get a 50% damage buff, and you would be absolutely blasting. And the strategy and fun implications of not only trying to pull into the canisters while also like thinking about what you're going to do after that, I thought was really, really super cool. I think in terms of boss design, all of the bosses were very tough. And I know that a lot of people want easier, more simple dungeons, but I think that all of the bosses were very tough but very fair, and I had a lot of fun. This might be healer bias, but I had a lot of fun healing and dealing with all of the bosses in that dungeon. I think there are definitely some things you can take away from it. The biggest complaints that I think are it's maybe a bit too long. I think the gauntlet at the end, I think people got really good at it, but it was really frustrating at first. And also there are some camera issues, but personally I didn't really, a lot of people complain about that, but I didn't really have those. But overall, I think Sanguine just has the best collection of bosses. I think it has the coolest dungeon mechanic. I think even though it was a hard dungeon, it wasn't hard in a way where it's like, oh, here's 8 casters and you have to chain CC all of these. It's hard in the sense that like you're pulling massive and there's frontals everywhere and you're like trying, you're blasting and your damage is super important because you have this canister going. And like, I think it was challenging, but it was challenging in all of the really fun ways that makes M+ fun.
Yep, and I also think the whole idea of figuring out how you play around your lantern and how you extend it and how you carry it and where you plan your CDs, like that, all of that adds so much to Sanguine Depths. Also, I gotta say, like, one of the big reasons why Sanguine Depths is so high for us is because the first time we ever played in the MDI, we completely crushed Echo in the cups, and we were the cup winners, Sanguine Depths, and we caused Gingy to slam his fucking chair in rage, and that was amazing.
It will always have a special place in our heart for that. There may be a little bias there, but for sure it's up there.
Well,
for me,
bias
even
matters.
without
That's
that.
why we have 4 different lists. Like I said, if I can't even rate Sanguine Depths because I'm serious. I don't think I've done that dungeon more than 5 times. I did 1 season with Sanguine Depths in it, and I know that I did it 3 times. Once on Tyran, once on Fortified, and then another hierarchy on Fortified, and never again. So like I have just no opinion. And as we saw before, doing something on the MDI can totally change your opinion of it. And when you have something like a 50% damage increase that you can chain, that sounds like something that'd be awesome in the MDI. But I want to point out something that I think is super interesting. So if you boil it down, I attach a negative to dungeons like Toldagor or Neltharis, or dungeons where a like gimmick is killing a ton of your trash count. Like I just think that's dog shit. But Sanguine Depths kind of did that, but all they did was they gave your characters the power instead of the item killing the things in a way. And I think that's a huge difference. And I think that's something they should explore more. Like your characters feeling powerful is sick, and random chains and cannons killing stuff sucks.
Yeah, I will echo that point being good. Like, fundamentally, it means there's a difference. Like, in Sanguine Depths, if you get a big lantern pull, you press your cooldowns, and it's all about, like, optimizing them, and you're having a blast. Whereas in Necrotic Wake, you hold your cooldowns because you know the weapons are going to kill this, and the most useful thing you can be doing is helping that happen, right? Is using utility and CCs and stops and stuff, and that experience is a lot less satisfying. So I agree that is a positive of that style, but I can't put this thing on my list. Like, you can't... If I was going into a guild group and we were going to do some keys that season and we did exclamation point keys and Sanguine Depths came up alongside like Mist, Wake, Plaguefall or whatever, and I was like, guys, let's do Sanguine Depths, like they would kill me with hammers. I would not be able to sell that to anybody in any group that I did, except for in like really high coordinated groups. It's just not it was a dungeon you would go into, and yeah, it's I think that experience was pretty common among a lot of groups. Like if you didn't have a good healer and a group that like knew what the mobs did, knew how the pulls worked, knew how to optimize the lanterns, you would go in there and you would just get like, you would get brick walled in the trash after the first boss. You would get brick walled on the trash before the first boss. You would realize your healer was like 3 key levels out of their depths on the 3rd boss, and you would just be, you would be up against a checkmate situation. It was not winnable, and that I think experience was so common in Sanguine Depths. And I agree though that like if you're pushing title in that place, You're pushing rank 1 keys, you're doing MDI in there. It has some of the best, but I would describe it like a raid boss that only had a mythic difficulty. Like you couldn't go in there and do it on lower difficulties. It just didn't work. It was fundamentally always amped up at full power, and that made it pretty inaccessible.
Yeah, it was basically like our Shrine of the Storm picks.
Yeah,
me and Max,
it
'cause,
is
like,
it is
it's not
Shadowland
something
Shrine of
that
the Storm.
feels like-
That's all it is.
Yeah, I've always said it
Yeah.
before. People are not gonna like Sanguine Depths, but if you actually played it in an organized group and you knew what you were doing, it banged hard.
All
The
right.
one thing you gotta say that I think is different between Shrine and Sanguine, I think it's a little unfair that I didn't put Shrine on my list for personal fun, but I think the difficulty in Shrine was a lot less intuitive and a lot more like you would have to do wild skips or like wild kick and CC rotations. But I don't really think that there was much of that in Sanguine Depths. Like Sanguine Depths was just difficult in terms of you took a lot of damage, you needed to deal a lot of damage, you needed to survive. And I think the difficulty, while they would be like equal in terms of you want to be in a really good group to do them, I think the difficulty was just way more fun in Sanguine Depths than in Shrine. But I mean, I also did have a lot of fun in Shrine. I feel bad for not having that on my list.
All right, so Sanguine Depths has been etched in stone with some great arguments, and now we are gonna go back-to-back fucking wild takes with Dorky's #1. If I'm
Okay, so yeah, nobody has this because it's the last one. It's you know what? Take a guess first. Can you guys take a quick guess? Each
you
of
already told us what it
It's
is.
the Motherlode, man. It's the Motherlode.
Oh, right, yeah, I already told. Oh, okay, yeah, it's the load. Holy, Motherlode is so sick. Now, I don't think Motherlode was like as well designed as like say Underrot or like as cool as Sanguine Depths, but Motherlode was so much fun. I enjoyed Motherlode a lot when it was out at the time. And keep in mind, this was with like dog shit affixes too. Motherlode was heavily infested by, no pun intended, but infested by affixes. There were affixes like Bolstering that would just make the mechs massive. You would have like Sanguine, it would just like heal all the mobs, etc. But there was just like so much flavor in that dungeon. There was so much variety. There were so many different mobs. The bosses were all fine. I enjoyed how much trash there was in the dungeon. It basically felt like Freehold kind of, but with more flavor. You know how like I talked about how Freehold was kind of just like vanilla, it's kind of bland. Motherlode is like kind of that, except enhanced. It's like fucking vanilla on crack. There's more shit happening, and there are like a bunch of different types of mobs. And I swear, if they brought back Motherlode, it would be an extremely good dungeon, just because of like how dungeons are nowadays and how affixes are nowadays.
I'm surprised I didn't put Motherlode on my list or consider it more. This was one very similar reasons to Shrine, where this was an MDI darling. If you did Motherlode, you were having a really good time. In fact, our group was like the first group to our like really early season, really early BFA MDI group. Sang actually figured out a way to pull all of the like activate all of the mechs all at once as soon as the dungeon started, by like doing that like pre-pull thing. And then like we actually, it failed in our route, but then like the next time the MDI came around, it was like, if you guys remember those Motherlode runs, like it all involved that tech. And doing that, having him figure that out was like, we felt like we had done something really cool. It lost points for me because like some of the trash in different areas was like stuff you were never ever gonna pull. But I did, like, if you think about it, like 70% of your mob count ish is entirely in that first area, and it's kind of like one big Underrot second room, isn't it?
Well, so I
Which
think
is great.
a large reason for that is like people just didn't necessarily know the dungeon too well, so people just like, kind of did whatever was in the beginning because they were familiar with it. It was definitely not true later on. Like as people got, that's also another huge plus for me. Is like as people got better and better at the dungeon, or people started to figure out the dungeon more and more, people started playing all the areas. Like towards the end of the season, towards the end of the expansion, people were playing all the mobs at the end because like people realized like, oh, the giant robots actually spawn bombs that give you counts, so they turned out to be extremely worth it. And most of the trash felt fair. The only thing that felt kind of bad was the trash by the third boss area with the alchemist and the, I don't know what else was there, like scientists or whatever.
What about that
Shout out
boss?
Grease Gun as well for
Yeah,
being like
Grease
an
Gun.
egregiously bad
Remember
mechanic,
when
but-
you pulled those little guys at the beginning and they would all wrench through you right away, and like as a tank, like you just got absolutely clapped. Like,
Well, I mean that's also
That
what
was
I
fine,
loved
I
about it
think,
because
but
like
the
there was like
Grease
so
Gun-
much ways you can game it.
Yeah.
The Grease Gun was horrifying. The mob
Gun
would be
was horrifying
stunned,
too,
and it would just
but-
be a gun would appear in his hand, and your tank would die.
Yeah.
Or, like your,
Well,
not your
no,
tank, your
but
random
like
person
what
would
made
die.
it great was that like you could have done the dungeon in so many different ways. Like part of what we did to counteract the grease gun was just put them all into max. So it was actually really cool.
That
how they
was
could,
cool.
like,
I
Yeah,
liked
that was
that
sick.
option. Dude, if you ever did any of those dungeons as well, where you would like, I remember we were playing with like a disc priest that season, and we would like shining
Knock 'em in.
force one,
Yeah,
so
yeah,
that
yeah, yeah.
it would then be nearer to a different mech to run and pilot it. That was so cool.
yeah, like there was actually so many cool things you could do.
And then it was also a really cool spell reflect dungeon, like the
Yeah.
and maybe that's also a criticism, like the tanking that third boss. Was it the third boss? The
Yeah.
second to last boss?
Rixa.
Yeah, like
Rixa
tanking
Flux
that
Flame.
boss without like diffuse magic or spell reflect was absolutely hellish. Like that dot hit so hard.
Nah, that was just a get good situation.
We had a bear.
That was a set your Hearthstone
we
to
had a
the
bear.
Hosen Throne. You would set your Hearthstone to the inn right outside of that place, and you would Hearth before the third boss, and you would talent all your Magic DR stuff.
Yeah, like
or
more
in
pain thing.
yeah that or in season 4 you would just have a verse set for that boss specifically and be a lot or maybe you had it all the time, but or lucid dreams. Yeah, that was crazy. The what was it? I also think it was a good affix dungeon. Like it had a really good interaction with Awakened. Like doing
100%.
doing different Awakened stuff. In the MDI, kiting it was like one thing, but like you had the ability, you could pull that trash at the end with the last boss. You could do like Awaken was a really cool thing. It was a really good reaping dungeon, right? So I think that added stuff to it as well.
Yeah, I love Motherlode.
Yeah, I mean, I will say that I didn't have it on my list, and a lot of us didn't have it or have it high because of how it was when it was, and the fact that affixes were so much more oppressive.
Oh, what a
back
good
then.
point.
Dude,
The thing
What a
is,
good
bolstering,
point.
sanguine, teaming. Do you guys remember teaming before they removed it in that place?
Bolstering, like Sanguine lasting a full minute with the max that would pause. But I'm very confident that if this dungeon came, or I'm gonna
I know what you're
take
gonna say.
Scopium here.
You're right.
When this dungeon comes back, that it's going to be an absolute banger unless they ruin it, because this dungeon without all of the annoying affix interactions,
You're 100%
is
right.
Gonna be. it's
You're
gonna bang.
100% right.
So
This-
I
yeah.
didn't put it in my top 10 because of the affixes. If you took away affixes and just the dungeon design, yeah, this Motherlode owns.
That actually makes me feel bad that I didn't put it on my list, because I just didn't think about that. But you are so right that if they brought this back, it would go up on everyone's list except for Dorkies, of course. And it would exist on all of our lists, because what made this dungeon so bad specifically was affixes that no longer exist or are heavily nerfed. So you're completely right. Fuck, I should have thought of that. Okay, we are on
Yeah, I showed a lot
Dratnos.
of that too.
What'd you say, Dork?
What's next?
Yeah.
We
so my
have-
number one is King's Rest.
Let's go.
No, it's Gambit.
Yeah, we could do some honorable mentions after this, but yeah. So Dratnos and I both have Gambit. Everyone has Gambit in their top 3, which I think is I actually made a little, hilarious. Someone in my chat assigned a point value to everything we posted. I think Gambit ended up number 1 by about 10. So I mean, I don't really have a lot to say from this other than this is by far the most fun I've ever had in a dungeon. I didn't play it in the TGP or MDI, whatever it was that season. I also think Gambit is going to maybe trend a little higher. And it has nothing to do with Gambit, and it has to be that the only 2 seasons this ever existed were 2 of the very best seasonals to ever exist, and in my opinion, by far the best one, and Encrypted. So just in general, we were talking earlier about like how certain dungeons would maybe feel better or worse depending on like the seasonals that you played when they were there, and like this one benefits from that a lot. But I don't know, man. The boss is owned. The first boss is sick. The last boss is like one of the coolest end bosses in all of dungeons. The pulls felt at the beginning one big giant Underrot second room, but the pulls were fucking huge. Like they were just talk about wanting big pulls. The first part of Gambit is like the best shit ever for that. The first boss had like a gimmick that was actually somewhat fun and not annoying to do. I just don't think this dungeon has any flaws. I enjoyed every part of it, and I would. If every dungeon in a season was as good as Gambit, I would just like drop everything and just be a Mythic Plus main. Like it was that good. That's my only take.
Holy Mythic Plus main. Yeah. Gambit is actually such a well-designed dungeon. I mean, the beginning is like super minimal on the cognitive overload. You could literally pull massive, and at most you have to deal with like, okay, maybe there's like a fish stick or 2, and there's like a bolt that you'll occasionally need to kick or stop, and like that's about it, right? Like I actually don't even remember what else you have to like necessarily worry about. I guess like pulling the giants. I will say like some of the wake points, not to take anything away from Gambit, is mobs that run away are complete trash. We should never have mobs run away. That's such a classic mechanic. The second thing is like the first boss could have been a little bit better with how it phases. If it was like percent based instead of timer based. But aside from that, like the rest of the dungeon was like almost perfect. I really loved the dragon boss. It was a dragon with a captain hat, and it was an actual tank boss. It's very rare to have a boss where the tank has like very
like staying
large...
alive and doing the mechanics were both tank jobs on that fight. It was cool.
Yeah. It was like a unique tank job that you had to be super aware of. And also the last boss I thought was really cool. The fact that the last boss can be a 5 to 7 minute long boss while being interesting the entire time is like such a win, because it was basically 2 separate different bosses, the first phase and the second phase.
One thing I want to say, maybe this is a little bit cheesy, that dungeon brought to me the new era of Mythic Plus of bringing back older dungeons. And I thought it was really, really cool that season doing like the first area is Legion, the second area is BFA, the third area is like Shadowlands, and it was like it's hard to call it a theme, but I thought it was really cool to be like, I don't know, just when I did that dungeon and I Freehold again, and you know, you have like the Legion stuff, and it sort of like brought, okay, now we're gonna just mix everything together, and this is how it's gonna be from now on. And I feel like Gambit was like the weird, maybe even unintentional leader of that movement for M+, and I feel like the dungeon pool has gotten a lot better since they started doing that.
Yeah, Gambit was so good.
All right, so it's officially that time.
I think the bosses weren't that good. I think
really,
like, I don't think 3 Gambit bosses would be in like the top 3 or the top like whatever of any list for me. That's like the only thing that I dislike.
What about the last boss?
The last boss was sick, right? I think the
Uh,
last boss is the only time.
The last boss just kind of felt like it really, really dragged on. Like, I think it was just too long. Maybe I'm just stung by Tyrannical or whatever. But I think the second boss is like always just a huge mess, and it just felt like you just hope your tank. Like, I bet tanks probably like that boss, but everyone else is just like, it's one of the. It's like, you know, the bosses where you just sit there and then you hope your healer doesn't suck. That's basically what the second boss is with tanks.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the nice thing about the second boss though is like there's a lot of group effort, assuming the team actually tries to do things.
Oh, we're just gonna stand here in DPS and you have to do everything.
Yeah. I mean, well, it didn't really work if you do it like that, but it was a pretty interactive boss for sure.
All right. I'm putting up a poll in chat. I want you guys to take a second and look at everyone's list. I want you guys to vote with which list you most agree with. Like, take a second, look at it, look at every single rank, and let's see who has the word of the people here. Oh, Dratnos is winning by a fucking landslide right now.
Man of the people. Dratnos for president.
Growl's
Bro,
somewhat
Streets
close.
at number 3.
That's right. Streets ahead.
That's right.
Yeah, Dratnos is done. Well, I'm trying to look at Dratnos's again. Yeah, Dratnos doesn't have anything that also is like directly assailing a lot of like the majority of Mythic Plus players too. Because I imagine that this stream right now is more high Mythic Plus coded because like they care about this stuff a lot more. But like everyone interacts with Mythic Plus in some way.
Yeah, I think it's just because like Dratnos is more of like, you know, spam whatever keys with your friends, and or if you're just pugging, and that's probably what the experience of most players like.
Trying to see what's different because I was the lowest by a mile and then Dratnos was the highest. I wonder what about my list and Dratnos's, which are pretty similar, was the most offensive to people. Probably the Shrine and Fall edition. Those are like the 2 main oh, and lower Kara top 3. Yeah, lower Kara top 3, Shrine and Fall. Dude, Kara, yeah, people, that is true. People hated Kara in that season. Like, it was unpopular as fuck.
Yeah, my list and your list are like spicy ones.
I think Growl's is weird. The top, like, Sanguine is spicy, but I think outside of Sanguine, his is not spicy at all. I think his is actually like, I think Sanguine Depths is probably the only reason Growl didn't win, actually. I think if Sanguine wasn't there,
probably lower Kara too, and
yeah, but it was low
Kara
though.
in the 7th place though is like,
yeah, like most
not gonna attract as much
things.
eyes.
Yeah, like
but it shouldn't be top 10.
most spicy takes from 6 to 10 are gonna weigh a lot less on people's minds, I think, than having them near the top. All right, hell yeah.
We should run this back with worst.
Yeah, I was about to say
Maybe
worst
5
would
instead
be.
of 10.
We could do that next weekend. Where like yeah,
Yeah.
you wouldn't do 10, but probably like top 5 worst would definitely be
Yeah.
interesting.